I once heard the Christian life described as an improbable wager on an impossible possibility. Christian life is an improbable wager on an impossible possibility. Brings to mind a parable to that effect. In John Updike's Month of Shadows, a group of men are playing a variation of poker. They're each dealt several cards, some of them on the table facing up, and the others concealed in the hand. In one round, the main character, whose name is Thomas, I believe, has been dealt a very strong hand, and he decides to bet heavily. As Thomas keeps sweetening the pot and raising the stakes, all of the other players drop out one by one. All except one particular player, a stutterer named Fred. In fact, Fred doesn't seem intimidated at all by Thomas's betting tactics. The curious thing is that Fred seems to have a weak hand. His cards showing on the table appear to be nondescript garbage. Yet remarkably, he keeps up the betting pace, calling and raising Thomas at every opportunity. Thomas is puzzled since his own hand is a poker player's dream. It's not perfect, of course. He holds one poor card, but other than that flaw, his hand appears to be unbeatable. Why doesn't Fred simply fold? When the time comes to lay down the cards, Thomas is shocked. It is Fred who has the winning hand. Thomas realizes that there was only one card in the whole deck that could have rendered Thomas the loser. And Fred was betting everything on this one card. Dumbfounded, Thomas thinks to himself, Fred had stayed then against me when only one card in the deck could have made my hand a loser to his. Two truths dawned upon me, he continues. He was crazy. He had won. He had raised not on a reasonable faith, but on a virtual impossibility, and he had been right. Choosing to live our lives according to the vision for which Jesus lived and died. To live this vision simply based on a conviction that it's a sure and certain hope that this vision will come to pass because Jesus has been raised and pours his Spirit out on the church. Well, all of that sure can seem like an improbable wager. I wonder if that's how Matthew's church was feeling when he saw fit to recall for his listeners the Beatitudes and Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. The church that lives according to the vision of the Beatitudes is a colony of the kingdom of heaven placed in the middle of an alien culture. It's a combative world, and yet the church is called to be made up of peacemakers. It's a world that turns its head away from unpleasant sights, and the church is bidden to mourn the homeless, the refugee, the brokenhearted, not look away. Yet what good is all of that when the church, with all its vision, finds itself so overpowered, outnumbered, even overlooked? Those are the questions that Matthew's community must have had. And they're questions that may resonate with some or all of you too. I don't know. And yet, the ordeal of Matthew's church is representative of the experience of the church in many times and many places for 2,000 years. A small group trying with mixed results to live out an alternative life, set down in the middle of a teeming culture that neither appreciates or understands them. The challenging thing in the life of faith is maintaining confidence in what, more often than not, appears to be an impossible possibility. And I wonder, I wonder if that is why Jesus chooses the descriptors of the Christian community that we heard this morning. He calls us salt. And then he calls us light. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Notice he says, you are, not you ought to be or should try to be. You are salt. You are light. Sure, Jesus is well aware of what happens to God's people under persecution and sustained opposition, or even sometimes when we simply succumb to complacency. Salt can lose its integrity, its identifying quality as salt. Not suddenly, of course. It comes about gradually. Those to whom it happens don't perceive themselves as changing and cannot identify a particular time or place when their faith fizzled. They just find themselves like the once mighty Samson, who rose from sleep to go out against the Philistines, not realizing that in the night he had been shorn of God's strength. Jesus recognizes, too, how easy it is to lose initiative in mission and take up a posture of protection and defense, about suffering after suffering in some way for our faith, or simply because we feel our survival is in question. For example, building a city on a hill is a sound strategy for self-defense, but the increased visibility attracts even more hostility. And putting a lamp under a bushel, well, that might certainly reduce the chance of it being blown out, but the prices for such protection is darkness. The way of Jesus, says Fred Craddock, is one of bearing witness and undertaking what he calls benevolent intrusion into the life of the world. To do otherwise is not to interpret Christ differently, but rather to abandon him. Yet it's this very subversive power of apparent powerlessness and of what might seem so common that Jesus claims makes his followers who they are and their witness so influential. Light is difficult to control. Just a tiny night light can make a huge difference. Lutheran preacher Philip Martin notes that in a time long before people knew the physics of light, that it had characteristics of both a particle and a wave, Jesus is telling his followers that their actions in his name will be mysteriously explosive, impossible to shut away. As little photons in a world of good and evil, disciples can beam and bounce off others and transmit holy energy to them, and like a wave, their actions can reach distances far beyond anywhere their legs could take them. Like when a prayer shawl stitched here warms a person in a hospital on the other side of town, or maybe even on the other side of the world. Likewise, long before anyone knew the chemistry of salt, that it is a stable compound with both positive and negative ions, which allow it to dissolve and spread into a larger surrounding substance. Jesus is telling his followers that although they might be small and pretty ordinary looking, and even totally different from each other, they would be able to season and enrich an entire community. By calling them salt and light, Jesus is gearing up his followers to understand they will represent to the world the true life of the kingdom of God. When Christ lives in them through faith, they will display the fulfillment of God's desires for the world through their own words and actions. That is what his disciples as a group, as a community, are and can do, flush with resources or not. I say as a community because we know he means all of us together, not just a bunch of individuals, but all of us together. Because the you he uses in Greek in that passage is plural. In every case, it's plural. What my friends in the U.S. South would translate as, y'all are the salt of the earth. Y'all are the light of the world. Let's y'all go shine light before others. As much as we can be fascinated and inspired in our society by the light and the power of an individual, time and again in the scriptures, Jesus' ultimate concern is about the impact of his followers as a group. And that's why for centuries our ancestors in faith would have had a very difficult time with the modern understanding that some seem to have, that someone can be a follower of Christ apart from the church, apart from one another. Jesus didn't make room for such a notion, and I can't think of one New Testament writer that did. It has been this y'all characteristic of discipleship that has allowed Christians in any generation to make a positive difference in the world. It's this y'all characteristic that still makes a difference today. I'm sure most, if not all of you, have heard about the singing resistance movement and how it's bringing together so many people in Minneapolis. It began its street-level outings 4 days after Renee Good was killed. In less than a week, those coming out to sing doubled from 300 to 600 people. Singing resistance, which is a movement not just in Minneapolis but around the globe now, was inspired by Otpor, a Serbian civil resistance movement that overthrew a dictatorship in the year 2000. Otpor members were regularly arrested and beaten by police, after which they would show up at police stations and at the officers' houses chanting, "You may not join us today, but you can join us tomorrow." And in the final hours of their revolution, hundreds of thousands of people from across Serbia marched on Belgrade. Milosevic ordered the police and military to fire on the massive crowd of protesters. However, the military and the police refused. They were done being on the wrong side of history. Anyway, perhaps you saw on CNN the piece on singing resistance in Minneapolis. Anderson Cooper spoke with Pastor Elizabeth McCauley of Hennepin Avenue United Methodist Church. She was someone who played a major role in launching this initiative in the city. As part of the clip, one anonymous organizer that Anderson Cooper was interviewing sang to Anderson Cooper a song that goes, "I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I live for liberation because I know why I was made." Song is a vehicle for us to grieve, she said. It's a vehicle for us to feel rage. It's a vehicle for us to strengthen ourselves. And then she added, the song, "I am not afraid," well, we're not singing it because we're actually not afraid. It's terrifying what's happening here. We're singing it because it's a way to gather our courage. The group, which I understand at one point had 2,000 people joining in, sang to ICE agents on one occasion not long ago outside of a hotel. "It's okay to change your mind," they sang. "Show us your courage. Leave this behind. It's okay to change your mind, and you can join us. Join us here anytime." Said one organizer, "When they come at us with violence, we fight back with love." What I find exciting about all of this is people from farther afield have been adding their voices to the singing. Just earlier this week, Canadian Mennonite University in Winnipeg hosted a community singing event also titled Singing Resistance, and it was offered as an act of support for the residents of Minneapolis. Do you see? What the people of God do in the world counts big time, even when it doesn't seem like much at first. A pot of soup cooked up in a soup kitchen for people on winter-worn streets, sitting with someone soon to breathe their last, showing up at public forums to raise the plight of the most vulnerable in the town, marching in solidarity and song. All of these works of mercy, and so many others like them, are the work of a church that flavors the world and sheds light, scaring darkness away in people's lives. Why, even a church that creates artwork for the Ukraine and gathers people together to process in prayer around a city can make a difference. So we put all of our chips in the pot. We make the improbable wager on the impossible possibility. After all, the hand that Jesus lays on the table is unbeatable.